Hello, everybody. This is Virginia Sisiopiku from the University of Alabama, Birmingham, here with my colleagues, Dr. Diane from UAB as well, and Dr. Mohammed Hadi from Florida International University, to welcome you to today's webinar. The topic of the webinar is examining modal shifts between automobiles, transit, and Uber trips, and quantifying their impacts. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge our students who contributed to this project. These include Jalal, Furat, Tanya, and Mustafa from UAB, and Ahnaf from FIU. This project is sponsored by Stride, which is also sponsoring today's webinar. The Stride Center is the 2016 USDOT Region 4 University Transportation Center, and it is a consortium of 10 universities and colleges in the Southeast, with the University of Florida being the lead institution. The mission of our center is to develop novel strategies for reducing congestion. We are very excited to have you with us today, and we would like to invite you to contribute questions at any time through the chat box that we have, and we will answer them at the end of the talk. So this study focuses on TNCs like Uber and Lyft. And we have seen the proliferation of these services in the last 12 years or so. When they were introduced, there was a hope that we will see some shifts from automobile trips toward these new services. But studies have showed mixed results. So some studies show that TNCs have complemented existing transit services and taxi services, and some others showed some competition that shifted trips from transit to TNC without having any major reductions in automobile trips. So given all these earlier conversations around the impact of TNCs on traffic operations and transit, we identified the need to examine modal shifts in the presence of TNC services and quantify the effects of transit and TNC operations on transportation network performance. The objective of our project was twofold. First, to study the influence of transit and TNC operations on the choices of individual travelers, and then also to assess the impact of those choices on the performance of transportation network. In order to meet our study objectives, the research team performed 4 interrelated case studies that used Birmingham, Alabama, and Miami Beach, Florida as the test beds, and the MATSIM agent-based simulation platform for modeling. We collected first user travel preferences data, then we developed novel methods for calibrating matching models using the originally approved model, split behavior model, as well as real-world traffic counts. We also collected and processed Uber trip level data using crowdsourcing in order to address the lack of publicly available TNC data, and also modeled ride-hailing operations in addition to automobile and transit trips in the same simulation testbed. So our presentation will try to cover all these case studies. As far as the products of our work, those are summarized on the slide that you see on the screen. They include the questionnaire, survey, rigorously calibrated matching model, and for the Miami Beach area, and the comprehensive digital twin model for the Birmingham area that incorporates both the TNCs, public transit, and automobile trips within the same model. I'll talk briefly about case study 1 that focuses on surveys of transportation users' attitudes and choices for ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft. This case study used a questionnaire survey that was developed in Qualtrics. It is an extension of an earlier survey that we've done on study, also sponsored by Stride, that was used in Birmingham, and now the extension included a similar survey used in Miami Beach, where we collected and analyzed responses of a total of 790 users of the transportation network, 451 in the Birmingham area and 319 in the Miami Beach area. In this questionnaire, we asked questions about travel mode choices of the participants. We asked them why they used or not used Uber and Lyft services. If they used the TNC services, they provided also information about the trip purpose, frequency of use, reasons for using the service, and so on. We also gathered detailed trip information for a typical day, a 24-hour diary, and the information included origin and destination of each trip they performed within that day, travel time, purpose, and travel mode. And of course, we collected the basic demographic information as well. All this information we analyzed through descriptive analysis. And in addition to that, we employed the least absolute stringent selection operator lasso method, the popular machine learning algorithm, to perform regression analysis. The purpose for that effort was to identify parameters that can be used to predict TNC use in our locations, and also provide the useful inputs to our simulation models that will be described later on by my co-presenters. So the table that you see on the screen provides some summary information about characteristics of the study sites and survey responses. When we asked them to provide information about trips that they had performed in a day, we used this information to analyze the data. Here you see the mode choices in the figure. What the figure shows is that the examination of over 1,130 reported trips from the Birmingham study region showed that only 6.3% of those trips were performed using Uber and Lyft, which was not very surprising, while 85.2% chose the automobile. In Miami Beach area, though, we found more users using the Uber and Lyft service, about 20%, and only 56% drove their automobile, based on the reported trips. We also looked at here the trip purpose for those trips that used TNC modes, and what we can observe by close inspection of graphs like the ones that you see on the screen is that the majority of the Birmingham responders used TNCs to travel to work or home, 29% travel to work, 25% to home. However, the TNC trips to work in the Miami Beach area are much lower, just 16% during work days, and far more low than those reported in the Birmingham metro. On the contrary, most of the trips performed by Uber and Lyft in the Miami Beach area are for entertainment purposes, going to restaurants, 28%, or for nightlife, 19%, and so on. These differences were not very surprising given the differences in the demographics of our two samples. And one has to keep in mind that in the Birmingham survey, 100% of the participants were residents. It was a requirement for participation, while in the Miami Beach area, which is a much more touristic area, as we all know, than Birmingham, only 20%, 21% of the participants were residents, and the majority, 79%, were tourists. So all in all, our survey responses confirmed that TNC service coverage and traveler demographic characteristics influence the perceptions of the users about TNC services, and as a result, the adoption of those services. And the survey also helped us provide data so that we can do some modeling to predict, to identify predictors of TNC use. For the Birmingham area, those predictors were the vehicle availability and the waiting time. For the Miami Beach region, on the other hand, variables identified as significant predictors of TNC use included vehicle ownership, vehicle availability, once again, availability of the service, as well as some demographic characteristics, including the age, income, and residency. From this work, an interesting difference between the findings from the two surveys was that the relationship was about the relationship between the vehicle ownership and the TNC use. So our market here in Birmingham is highly automobile dependent, and the TNC use was more closely linked to the need because of the lack of vehicle availability than the choice, while the opposite was the case in the Miami Beach case study. With respect to limitations, spectrum bias and self-selection bias may have impacted the findings of our study, and this is a typical situation with studies of this nature that collect information about perceptions, preferences, and choices of users. And we would like to caution that the study findings be generalizable only to groups that have similar demographic profiles as the ones described in our research. Given also the limited scope of our study, we would recommend that local surveys be performed to document travelers' preferences in other locations where Uber and Lyft operate. So with that, I think I will turn the microphone to my colleague, Dr. Hadi, who will describe case study 2 that focuses on the calibration of a multi-agent based simulation model for the Miami Beach network. Mohammed?
Thank you, Virginia. And let me see. You see my screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. Our case study that I'm going to talk about is the use of a multi-agent based simulation model, an open source model called MatSim, and to model the Miami Beach network, and to demonstrate the ability to calibrate that model using the regionally approved mod split model and real world count data and so on. And basically it was an exploration exercise, considering that there is some interest in using multi-agent simulation versus the other models, and we want to see its applicability and usability. By concentrating on a small case study of estimating mod shift due to enhanced transit service and also road pricing. The reason why there is an interest, some interest in multi-agent simulation is that existing travel time, existing travel demand model use static demands through the whole peak period, and we know that the demand vary. And then also the traffic flow model and demand forecasting model most of the time use either a BPR curve or a Schilling equation. These are very simple analytical equations that do not reflect the congestion, and a lot of also they allow demand to capacity ratio to be more than 1. The model also uses static assignment and also static discrete choice model. By static discrete choice model, and we mean that it is for the whole 3 hour, 4 hour of the peak period, and doesn't consider the variation every 15 minutes or 30 minutes in the peak, deciding to do the mode shift or even the an assignment and so on. And then and also the trip generation and other. And then agent-based simulation uses traffic simulation and loops between supply and activity-based. So it provides much more realistic and dynamic system. So this is just a framework, simple explanation of the framework is we start with an initial demand, we go to the simulation, and then we have it has a scoring function within the MatSim open source tool that score the trip alternative for each agent or individual in the simulation, and then change the activities of that person based on the scoring for this period of time, and then go and iterate in the replanning step, and go back and change the mode choice, the demand, and shift even the time of the generation of the trip during the day, and so on. And this is the network. It has a very congested network. Miami Beach, it has mixed of traffic, a lot of tourists, and also there are causeways. That's those ones on the left side. These are causeways that connect the Miami Beach to the mainline, Miami-Dade County or City of Miami mainline. So this is the area that we model. The data we obtain, the road network and demand model, we extracted it from the demand model and converted to MatSim. And then we generate a full day plans based on the activity-based model of the region, demand forecasting model. We also obtain information about public transit options like route profile, stops, departure time, service frequency, and so on, including bus services and local trolley, which is very popular with tourists in that area. And then we also have count and travel time data. Some of the parameters in the replanning strategies include the utility of time and money, and the utility of travel versus staying home, which is different for different modes, and then utility of distance and so on. So these models parameters can be calibrated. Also, on the supply side, you can change the link capacity and the free flow speeds. And this is just an explanation of the process of the calibration. I'm going to talk about a little bit in detail on this. So one of the things that we did is to model the MatSim, as we talked about. MatSim has a scoring function, versus the Cube has a discrete choice model for mode split. So what we did is we perform an optimization to obtain scoring functions that result in similar results to what the Cube equation for the same static conditions. and the idea is that the cube equation is the accepted calibrated equation for the region and so on. And also we calibrate the model for counts, and we were able to reduce the error, mean percentage error, significantly. And even with the mod split, if we use the default values, maxim was developed in Europe. So when we use the maxim parameters without calibrating it for the regional demand with the regional demand model, we obtain 30% shift in the mod split. It's 30% mod split, while it is much lower than this, about 3% as we had we looked at. And then once we did that, then as we can see here, we the calibration model produce results that are similar somehow to the SERPEM model. And then after that, we change the model parameter. We introduce a metro rail and highway toll to discourage people from using their vehicle. And based on that, we were able to see some shift in the demand. So this again was just a simple exploration. It is a significant effort to calibrate the model, but we were successful in doing that, and we found that it was effective and based on traffic flow and mod split. The model was capable to estimate the shift toward public transit, and the effort could benefit from further fine-tuning of the maxim model. Further modeling is recommended of park and ride, kiss and ride, automated mover, first mile, last mile, collector, distributor, ride polling, and hailing, and micro-mobility options. We actually tried to do some of the model of Uber, but we found difficulty in doing that, and because of this small budget and short time of the projects, again, that was just an exploration effort. We decided to postpone an introduction of the Uber type services in the model until the future effort. So I think this is conclude my presentation, and I think next is Dr. Diane.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Hadi. I will share my desktop. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so the third part is about rich mode in addition to, let's say, private cars. We want to study, for example, what's the impact of, let's say, public transit, right? Buses and trains, and also like TNC companies, right? So like Uber and Lyft, and how their impact is to the current traffic, especially we are based on Birmingham. So how the new mode, right? The TNC companies and the public transit is impacting the traffic in Birmingham. And so we also explored a new micro mobility service like e-scooter, e-bike, shared mobility, where people can just use an app and grab a e-scooter and ride to their destination and just leave along the roadside. And so this kind of service, how it will also impact the traffic. So yeah, this is actually a collaboration with two teams as an interdisciplinary project between Dr. Virginia from transportation engineering and me from computer science side. And so of course we each have our groups, right? And on my side, mainly Jalal is doing a lot of programming work, and we discuss those data science techniques to make things work. And Jalal is also working on this kind of maxim configuration, right? So we collaborate by, like, Virginia will tell us the domain knowledge, and usually we will get some user survey from Virginia about their mobility information, and then we will do some data analysis, including, for example, getting data from open repository to enrich the survey, and we want to do simulation as I think the Virginia and Dr. Hadi all have described. We use a MASSIM for simulation, right? And then after simulation, the Virginia will provide some feedback, and we will see if, let's say, we need to adjust the simulation model. Maybe some input is not perfect, and so there will be multiple runs. And finally, using this simulation as a digital twin of the real traffic in Birmingham, we can reach some study conclusions. So by the way, July is on the job market. If you know some good opportunities and interest in July, feel free to contact him. He is also in the Zoom. Okay. Yeah, so here are a few research outcomes. I think the most recent one, we actually were selected as best paper candidate by ACM6 Spatial Conference. And it's about Uber actually, ride hailing services, TNC companies, right? So, and I would mainly describe this work that we did, and the other two works are actually about shared mobility, which are like e-scooters and e-bikes, which we recently deployed for a few years in Birmingham already. And we also did a public transit study, which leads to a journal paper, mainly led by a student of Virginia. And we also, so all these are actually new modes, whether it's a public transit like bus, or whether it's Uber, or it's e-scooter, like there's a company called Vio deployed e-scooters in Birmingham, right? So all these new modes are impacting we call it the background traffic, right? The background traffic is the major traffic in Birmingham, where people mainly drive private cars from the house to whatever supermarket or the like UABs or destinations. So actually, this research starts by we need to first generate the background traffic, right? We need to know the mobility habit and the day travel plans for the population, right? So, and again, we are using MASSIM, which is the blue box in the middle. And MASSIM takes, for example, the road network for executing their plans, right? The multi-agent plans for the entire population. And it is from OpenStreetMap, and also takes the day plans. That's the major part that we're generating. We need to make sure the population day plans are realistic, right? And it also takes some other things, like if you are doing the transit, they have a sub-module for public transit. And if you are doing, for example, Uber, right? So we are currently using a taxi module there. You can have a bunch of drivers keep waiting till there's passengers, and they will pick them up. And so the MASSIM output is basically a list of events, like what happens in which time, like somebody get on the car, get off the car, or turn left, turn right. All those details are actually recording that event file. And based on that event file, we can do all kinds of flexible analysis using data science techniques by writing some, like Python query, Python language to do some querying. So again, even though the surrounding MASSIM, we are using Python mostly to do the data science analytics to generate the realistic plans or analyze the simulation results. The core code of MASSIM is in Java. And oftentimes the modules are not that flexible, so we need to actually change their code, customize to our needs. And especially, for example, we have changes of some score functions, because if we integrate some new modes like e-scooters and some multi-modes are both integrated, then of course we need to adjust the original scoring function, which is the third step in MASSIM in that loop. And we also have basically there's a lot of configuration we need to do, and even changing the Java code inside MASSIM to make it really flexible enough to work. And to study all those new modes, right? The first thing we really need is a background traffic, right? So fortunately, I think at the very beginning, Virginia provided a survey of around 500 people with detailed information about their plans, like say when they go to walk, and then they go to lunch, and they go back to work, and then drive home, or maybe drop by a grocery store. We'll have the detailed time, starting time, end time, location, all those information there. This actually can capture this is a small sample of the whole population, right? So can capture a trend of how people are trying to moving around the different regions, right? So for example, we use zip code areas as shown in the lower right corner. But again, to generate those agent-based simulation, you need to provide all those details for the entire population of Birmingham, for example, right? 500 people is not enough. So you really need to extract their habit, and then you need to add back all those details. For example, right? So we really need to have diversified information. You cannot have scale just 500 people to like 50,000 people by just having replicate them, right? Otherwise, they will go from the same home to the same working place, right? So, for example, we use open addresses, which is the open data repository for all the addresses in Birmingham, in the United States, at least. And specifically, our study area of the Great Birmingham contains 2 counties, Jefferson and Shelby, as shown in the lower left corner. And we also use OpenStreetMap, which not only provides massing the road network, but also all these amenities, right? So you can even find a Costco or whatever hospital or schools there, right? So they provide a lot of those rich COI information, POI information, point of interest information, right? And we also have those American Community Survey and all those other information. You can get the geographic and population density, etc. Right? All those helps complete the details of the plans we need to generate. On top of this, a small sample we have. But of course, we need to do a lot of statistical data science techniques to make them realistic, right? And we find that a lot of the traffic is generated by walking, right? Because if you think about the peak hours, it's really driving from home to work and driving from workplace to home. So we specifically model walk as one of the most important activity. And we also, basically what we do is from Birmingham Business Alliance, we get the top employers. They are top 150 employers with a lot of employees. So we assume this is a representative of the like a work location distribution for the Birmingham, and we generate a distribution following that distribution, like using kernel density estimation, right? So, and of course, we need to also dig the web to get their exact locations, right, for this purpose. And so we also, for example, besides the working place, they also have other activities, right? So, and we study our survey, we find that usually there are different kind of lags, which is shown on the right, top right diagram. We can see that as most of people have like 2 or 3 or 4 lags in their trip each day. Okay, so long ones are very rare. Maybe they're just Uber drivers. Okay, so and we do some analysis and summarize the statistics there. And from there, these 500 people, what we can do with safely is really not the, for example, not their exact locations for each population, right? At least we learn the distribution of the workplace and the home. But what can be safely learned is their, for example, starting time and ending time for each activity, right? So if half of them are working, and we can really fit a distribution from them. And also like the lag length, right? So how long it takes for each activity. Let's say for walk, how long usually take from home to the office, and for if you just eat in a restaurant, usually how far you are willing to travel, right? So these things can give us some distribution that we can use later to generate the day plans for the entire population. And this is a background traffic generation pipeline where we use a lot of open data, as you can see, and we use an IPF called what is that? So it's a kind of scaling method in statistics to scale the population. We group the population by zip code areas, which is already very fine-grained, and then we kind of scale them up and to the entire population size. And then we generate the detailed information like the time, the location for each lag, right? And one after another, based on the conditional tree of the activities presenting our survey data, right? So basically, this is more like a graphic model, and so this will, following this, we can generate the entire population data, then we can use them for simulation. And the result is actually quite good. We actually verified the result using the real highway monitoring data, and the matching is reasonable. And then we study a lot of the rich mode on top, right? So for example, we have the, we have the, you know, the Uber, right? Uber driver, TNC companies. We also have, for example, like a public transit, like buses, right? We also have e-scooters, e-bikes, right? So due to the time limitation, I will just talk about how our recent work integrated like Uber rides into our background traffic I just described. And this paper was published in 2022 in SM6 Spatial and selected one of the best paper candidates. Okay, so what we do is actually several steps. Firstly, we are collecting Uber trip screenshots from drivers. The reason we collect the screenshots from drivers instead of passengers is because, you know, drivers do not have control of where they ride, right? So unless maybe they have control of their regions they want to serve, right? But the passenger really driven the actual source and destination needs, demand, right? So really it's more diversified if we just collect all the rides from the drivers. And this is an, of course, IRB approved survey, right? And we just get a screenshot, so there's not much back and forth, you know, questionnaire where it will be error prone otherwise, right? So then we find people to annotate because we need to know the exact trajectory and time, right, and the distance, etc. And then based on these trajectories of the Uber rides, we can then the distribution of the Uber rides, right, starting time, ending time, location, all those things on our road network. After which we can use these distributions to generate these realistic Uber rides, Uber plans, right? And finally, these things can be given to Massim to do simulation, and the output can be analyzed afterwards. So here's what we do, right? So we only find 8 drivers, right? Because the study actually takes the cost, you know, we need to give them rewards, right? But each of the driver contributes a lot of screenshots because they're frequent drivers of Uber in Great Birmingham. And then we collect actually over 4,000 screenshots there. And what we can easily extract are like the origin address and destination address, but unfortunately for privacy reasons, drivers cannot see the exact location. Right, driver can only see along which street, which avenue, right, which road. Okay, you cannot see the exact location on that road. It's actually one-dimensional instead of two-dimensional, like a crossroad. So right, so it's the address is a vague address, but you can see how long it takes and when the time is requested, so you can get the temporal information. But how can we get the exact coordinates, at least nearby coordinates, right, the approximate coordinates of the origin and destination? So the solution is to use georeferencer because in addition to the vague addresses at the top of the right of the screen on the right, we also have their, you know, trajectory snapshot, right? Even though it's so small, but we can use some existing mapping services, find some reference point to align them, right? And once they are aligned, we can actually recover the trajectory, okay? And then for example, the green point is the starting point, is the origin, right? The red point is the destination. Of course, they are very big circles after you zoom in, but then you can find the location on that street that they explicitly indicated. Oh, sorry. Let me see. Okay, I hope, yeah. Right, so let me see. Okay, so then we collect a few critical points on the trajectory and we can get the sampled trajectory points, right? And then we need to do map matching because these points may not be along the road, right? So we need to do a map matching to align them to the underlying road network. After that, we can see, because we have over 4,000 trips, we can see the heat map of how the trajectory looked like. And you can see that really the key highways and the airport are the hotspot. Actually, in Birmingham, these are the, sorry, I don't know why it's, these are the key highways, right? And this is the airport on the upper right corner. Oh, I don't know why, so let me just click here. Okay, so yeah, so we also created OD matrix for this different trips, right? And then we actually can cut off those low count, and finally you can see it's either in downtown or in the airport. These two things are remaining. And then based on the statistic, we actually fit the distribution of how likely, for example, this is where people tend to call Uber, right? The red region are high chance that people will call Uber, right? The blue is low, the yellow is medium. We fit this distribution, and from there we can then generate these trips. And the distribution should not be just a spatial, right? It should be also spatial temporal. So we actually fit the distribution also considering the temporal aspect, right? So like maybe lots of people are calling Uber from UAB when they leave the job, leave the work, right? So, but when they come to work, maybe you know, its destination is a peak. Origin is not a peak. Origin can come from anywhere. And then based on these distributions, we will do several samples, right? We can sample how many trips we need from that OD matrix, right? And then which will scale up, of course, using IPF technique. Yeah, so and then for each typical area, we get a distribution of the origin, and we also sample from the destination, but we only sample on conditional distribution where we, of course, the destination, the time should be after the beginning time of the origin. And we also do some study, and we find that if you only have 200 drivers for the entire Great Birmingham, you can see in the top left diagram, the green curve never finished in 24 hours, right? So we cannot meet all the demands, right? But if you increase it to 400 drivers, that's enough, right? And in the lower image, you can see that if we have 800 drivers, most of them are idle, right? But I think this is like a common because not every driver is driving all the passengers all day long, right? So, and we also study the traffic on, you know, US 31 and one of the highway around, you know, UAB. And so we find that actually the impact of having this mode does not cause any congestion, which actually there are people reporting this in big cities like San Francisco or New York. So in Birmingham, this is good. And yeah, so this is an example of our simulation where, you know, the blue nodes are the bus, and the background traffic is really by the you know, green arrows, right? And the Ubers are the red cars moving, and we can also see some like each driver, right? So drive how many rides each day, what's the trajectory, which is on the top right corner. Yeah, so that's all my presentation, and see if there's any questions. Thank you. Yeah, I will stop sharing. Yeah, I see a question in Q&A from Anna Kopp, right? The cube equation you mentioned when comparing to maximum scoring function is not something I'm familiar with. Could you talk about that a little bit more? Maybe this is to Dr. Hadi, or?
Yeah, I think it's possibly to me. Yeah, I think okay, yes. So the cube function demand forecasting model normally have logit models. So those logit models calculate a utility for each alternative, each mode, and that include the cost, the travel time, the waiting time, and the distance, and so on. And once you calculate it, you apply those utilities in the logit function, and you calculate the proportion of people that select each mode. And those are normally calibrated for each region.
Thank you, Mohammed. This is Virginia again. I would like to encourage anybody that has questions to put them in the chat box. We can have about a minute for this purpose, but also I would encourage you to answer the survey. It is a very short survey, and if you look at the chat box, then you can find a quick link to that. So are there any other questions from the audience? Well, I really appreciate you spending the time with us today. I would like to thank my co-presenters for their excellent presentation. And let us know if you have questions afterwards. We're all available to answer your questions. Otherwise, have a great day and thank you again for joining.
Thank you.